Let's bring in Rob Manwaring, Associate Professor, College of Business, Government and Law at Flinders University. Well, thanks so much for joining us on East Asia tonight. So let's talk about soaring costs, increasingly fraught relations with China, and of course, the uncertainty that's created by US tariffs, among some of the main issues said to shape the polls. How do you think these issues will shape the direction of policy or leadership going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think what we probably can say with the new Albanese government is that I think the two watchwords will be sort of stability and caution. I think they're very mindful, and it was a real played out in the election here, is about the kind of global disturbances and the sort of Trump effect has the way it's kind of playing out in terms of global economic policy. So I think the Albanese government will be seeking to be kind of cautious, stable, and kind of reassuring.
So stability and caution central to Mr. Albanese's thought and how he wants to propel the country forward. But the country's economy, though, I mean, it's been mostly lifted, if I'm not mistaken, by immigration, property, as well as trade with China. But somehow foundations now seem somewhat shaky, don't you think? And do you think for the leaders it's going to be a straightforward fix, or do you think the tough reforms are just simply inevitable?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to unpack there. I mean, firstly, in terms of the spread of Australia's economy, I mean, the biggest, one of the most significant markets, of course, is our export of resources and minerals, and particularly into China. And so that remains a significant part of the economy. In Western Australia, for example, it's a huge part of kind of economic kind of growth. So Australia will be seeking to ensure that there's a sort of the clear markets for its kind of resources and its kind of minerals. Immigration was a sort of smaller factor within the election, and it sort of, there is this kind of ongoing kind of question about, is an Albanese government prepared to kind of talk with the Australian public more explicitly about what kind of future immigration and skills needs looks like, because certain parts of the economy are heavily reliant on kind of immigration. And I think overall, the Albanese government will be seeking to sort of try and balance its kind of cultural ties, perhaps with America and the Trump administration, but perhaps it's try and also ensure stability with economic ties with China. And the one thing I just would further add is that relations with China deteriorated significantly under Scott Morrison's Liberal coalition government several years back. And part of perhaps the success, or one of the successes that the Albanese government would say in its first term, was trying to normalise and recalibrate its relationship with China. And I think in its second term, it will seek to sort of keep that relationship open and successful.
And how is that coming along? You mentioned about normalizing, trying to recalibrate relations with China. Do you think he has managed to repair the ties or the frayed ties which Scott Morrison, did back then?
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, what was interesting is under the first term is that I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Foreign Minister Penny Wong who went, made a visit to China, which just hadn't even occurred, because during the kind of the tail end of the Morrison kind of era, I mean, Chinese officials weren't even picking up the telephone to speak with the Australian kind of foreign minister at the time. So we're definitely seeing a kind of an opening up of that relationship. It's a difficult one and a tense one, because Australia, as a strong, vibrant liberal democracy, in one sense, is still quite sceptical about dealing with some of the kind of the political record of kind of China, but also in one sense is also kind of worried about Chinese kind of expansionism. So one priority focus area I think will be interesting to watch will be how Australia engages with the sort of Asia Pacific area and the Pacific region. And I think it was very telling that Anthony Albanese has announced that his first overseas visit will be to Indonesia. And I think it's about trying to rebuild its relationship within the Pacific region, which again had deteriorated under the Morrison government.
So aside from trying to, mend ties with China, I mean, Australia also has to make sure that it doesn't get caught in the crossfire between US-China rivalry, right? So what kind of damage control will be needed there as the two superpowers compete?
Well, I think to a certain extent, I mean, Australia did relatively well compared to other countries out of the kind of the tariff liberation day under sort of the Trump administration. And it's sort of telling that that President Trump seems to know very little about Australia. That probably actually, to a certain extent, might favour Australia because it's in one sense, it's not a kind of high economic kind of target in its size compared to other countries, perhaps say like Japan. I think the other way that Australia might seek to try and work out how to navigate these two sort of superpowers really is probably working with Keir Starmer in the UK. There are natural affinities between the two Labour parties. Both prime ministers come from very similar sorts of backgrounds and have a relatively shared outlook about how to navigate this. And I think that relationship with the UK in particular will be probably quite an interesting one as they try to build sort of a coalition of other like-minded countries to try and navigate this kind of dark shadow as it's been put.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about, security blocks like AUKUS and Quad agreements, that sort of reliance. Do you think that's inevitable when you're navigating this complex and changing Indo-Pacific environment? And is that why Mr. Albanese is choosing to go to Indonesia, for instance?
Yeah, quite right. And I think, in lots of ways, some of the global rules order is more unstable than it's ever been before. Some of these blocks probably more fragile than they have been before, and so that makes it makes things probably more difficult to navigate. What I think is interesting for those your viewers with sort of longer memories is that when Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister in 2007 in Australia, he, for example, floated the ideas about really trying to build up ASEAN and that kind of bloc region. But it was an idea that never really went anywhere. What's different perhaps with Anthony Albanese is there's probably less sort of political ambition on the global stage to kind of create or refurbish some of these kind of global institutions. I think that he will take probably, as I said, a kind of more cautious and pragmatic relationship with a number of kind of key countries really to try and help sort of dampen down these kind of rising tensions.
Some really interesting points you've made there. Thanks so very much for sharing with us, Professor Rob Manwaring from Flinders University.